Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back. I hope you enjoyed your coffee. I'm pleased to say that one of our sponsors, Parkhouse Bell, has found their goodies, and actually they were well worth waiting for. We have biscuits, packs of biscuits, nicely decorated, so I'd advise you to go and get their stand. Go and get them whilst they're there. I've got quite a few to keep me going during the rest of today's session. So that would be great. The other thing is, obviously, to remember if you're going to tweet to hashtag SEG2019. I believe we're trending on Twitter. I'm not entirely sure I know what that means. But we're trending, which is really good. Anyway, okay. I hope you feel refreshed after the break. Some great feedback about the conference so far. Okay. This week saw the launch of the new Education Inspection Framework. You're no longer allowed to call it the Common Inspection Framework, I understand. I suppose I might have to donate at least £1 every time I say Common Inspection Framework to the Skills and Education Group Foundation. So the new Education Inspection Framework was launched this week. It's not often that you put on your conference and Ofsted decide that they're going to launch it especially for you, but that's what they've done, so we're delighted. And it will come into place in September 2019. Paul Joyce is fast becoming a regular at our annual conference, and this year's conference couldn't have been timed, as I said, any better. Please join me in giving a warm welcome to Paul Joyce from Ofsted.
Thanks very much, Paul, for that very warm introduction. Real pleasure to be here, and as Paul rightly said, we obviously timed the launch, especially for this event. Paul set me a challenge because I must confess I call this the Common Inspection Framework, so apologies for when I say that through the presentation. I too will donate that £1. Real pleasure to be here. I hope after today's session that I am invited again next year, because it's a real pleasure to be able to talk to so many providers, senior managers at events like this, face to face, particularly when, as Paul has rightly said, the consultation response launch and our new framework launch is as so close to the conference as it is this time. We are going to take some questions at the end. That's the more difficult part of this, so I'm going to do the easy part and run through this presentation first. Paul's promised that you're not going to ask too many difficult questions, and Paul's not going to, he's assured me.
I don't remember doing that.
If there are any difficult questions, as I'm sure some of you will know, my colleague Julie Ashton is here and running a workshop this afternoon, and Julie will be able to answer those difficult questions, so please leave them for her. Okay, let's have a run through these slides. So, just a reminder really, when Amanda joined as Chief Inspector, we very quickly refreshed our strategy to make very clear publicly what Ofsted wants to be and what Ofsted wants to achieve in Amanda's tenure. And that's very clearly to be a force for improvement through intelligent, responsible and focused inspection and regulation. And that strategy has played a really, really key role in shaping our new framework. So that is why we have absolutely in this framework put the curriculum at the heart of inspection. And what that means in all remits, so FE and skills is no different to any other remit in that respect, that inspectors will no longer place undue weighting on the progress and attainment data that's produced, or place too much weighting on in-year progress and attainment data that you as providers are often asked to produce, sometimes solely for Ofsted inspection. So we hope that that will take a little bit of the heat out of inspection, and importantly, to reduce any unnecessary workload in providers. We really want you to focus on what matters most, and that's the teaching and learning of a really good curriculum that benefits students. So we are going to place less weight on qualification achievement rates and much more weight on the quality and substance of the curriculum you deliver. So what you deliver and why and how will be the real focus of inspection and will carry the real weight of inspection judgments, and not so much how high your qualification achievement rates are. The framework has been a long time in development, and we've obviously used our inspection experience and expertise over about 26 years of inspecting to shape this framework. We've engaged with inspectors and providers across all remits to find out what really, really matters on inspection, what are the most important things for us to focus on. In addition, we have used a significant amount of external research information and some research that we have conducted internally to complement that external research, to ensure its validity and to ensure it's robust to be used for inspection purposes. So this framework is the most research-informed framework that we've ever had. We have ensured the criteria that inspectors will evaluate are criteria that matter and that make the most difference to students when they're attending providers. It's a framework where we have conducted the largest ever number of pilot inspections, and before we launch in September, we will have completed over 250 pilot inspections in providers across the remits, including a significant number in FE and skills providers. And I'm sure there'll be some of you in the room that have participated in those pilots, and my sincere thanks for allowing us to do so. Those pilots have really helped shape where we are, and I'm very confident in the position we're in to be able to introduce a framework that will be fit for purpose. If you participated in some pilots, particularly the earlier pilots, things have changed quite a lot, and I will say a little bit more about that later, and I'm sure Julie in her workshop will touch on inspection methodology and the change in inspection practice a little bit more. For the first time, we have shared our draft inspection handbooks through the consultation process, and again my sincere thanks to all of you that responded to the consultation. Your responses have helped shape that inspection handbook, and the handbook that we've now published is in a much better place as a result of the consultation, our pilots and the comments that we've received from the sector and from inspectors during the consultation phase. And obviously the consultation is the biggest ever consultation response that we have received in Ofsted, which again, I'm truly grateful to everybody that took the time and effort to respond. So let's have a look at the consultation in a little bit more detail. We had more than 15,000 responses. About 11,000 of those were to the online questionnaire, but we did have over 600 email responses and over 4,000 responses as a result of a campaign by Young Minds. My team, senior HMI within the regions, policy teams across all of the remits, engaged with providers, with stakeholders in about 150 face-to-face events across the country, and we conducted over 400, we conducted a number of webinars where over 400 people participated and gave their views through that medium. So let's have a little look at what the consultation told us, and importantly what we've done as a result of those consultation responses. So starting with the quality of education judgment. And to remind you here, this was one of our most significant proposals, and we wanted to lose the separate grade for outcomes for learners and the separate grade for teaching, learning and assessment that exists in the current framework, and to replace that with a single all-encompassing judgment called the quality of education. So that would subsume the outcomes for learners judgment and the teaching, learning and assessment judgment, but would focus particularly on the quality of the curriculum. It would change inspection methodology, it would change the focus of inspection and put that lens firmly on the substance of education rather than on how high qualification success rates for the courses you deliver are. There was very strong support for the proposal from across the remits and particularly in the FE and skills sector. I was really pleased with this response because obviously we thought that this was the right direction of travel to allow inspectors to use their professional judgment to a much greater degree to look at the substance of education and what you as providers do for the benefit of learners and place less weight on data. So we were very pleased that this was very, very strongly supported, as you can see from the slides. There were some negative responses, but by and large, most of these concerns, and I absolutely understand this, was around the consistency of inspection practice and the consistency of the judgments that inspectors would make. And we are working very, very hard to ensure that in a process that's conducted by human beings, and I assure you all inspectors are human beings, despite what sometimes is said, we are doing all we can through training, through development, through piloting, to ensure our inspectors apply the education inspection framework, and I nearly said that then, the new education inspection framework as consistently as is possible to do so. So we understand the concerns around consistency of judgment. We will ensure that our quality assurance arrangements and our internal quality processes, particularly early on in the new academic year, will ensure as far as we can that inspectors are applying the framework consistently. So we are going to introduce that new quality of education judgment from September. Our handbooks have been updated and make very clear what inspectors will evaluate as part of that quality of education judgment in each of the remits. And as I hope you would expect, what inspectors will evaluate does differ in the different remits. So you do need to read the Further Education and Skills Inspection Handbook to find out what inspectors will look at and evaluate, and importantly, what inspectors won't look at or won't take any account of during inspections. And that's now very clear in our handbooks. We are very aware that for some providers, that may mean some significant change to the curriculum you wish to offer. And we appreciate that curriculum change takes time. So we don't want you to rush this. We don't want you to do it overnight. You will need to think about your curriculum offer. And if any changes are to be made, you need to do that in a planned and managed way. And for that reason, we are introducing a transition period where inspectors will look at the curriculum through the lens of intent, implementation and impact, and they will have that conversation with you if you are in the middle of changing your curriculum or if you have plans to change your curriculum for the benefit of students. And if you are doing so, after that conversation, after that evidence, they will take that into account when judging the quality of education. But please make no mistake, inspectors will need to be convinced that your plans have been considered, are being implemented, and you have really thought about this and doing it in a managed way. It won't be enough to claim some exemption under the transition arrangements for the plan to have been written 5 minutes after the inspection notification period. So just a word of caution on that one. Our new model for inspection, so the methodology, you will notice as providers that inspectors will do things differently. So yes, they will still look at teaching, learning and assessment during lessons, sessions, workshops and in the workplace. And yes, they will still speak to students, to teachers, trainers, assessors, to managers and to governors. But the questions they will ask, the sequence and the order in which they will do that, so the purpose of their activity will be very different. And I've tried to explain that on this slide. So inspectors will get a top-level view from senior managers about the curriculum intent. Why are you offering the courses you are offering, and what is the purpose of your provision? What inspectors will then do is take that information and look at that in terms of implementation and impact when they conduct some deep dive activity within the different subject areas, within the different aspects or different topics that you offer. So inspectors will select a number of subject areas, for example, where they will conduct deep dive activity. They will look at intent at subject area level with perhaps a head of department or a curriculum leader. They will look at implementation of that intent within the subject with the curriculum leader. So they will look at teaching, assessment, they will scrutinise learners' work, they will talk with learners and teachers, they will talk with employers. And what they're doing is looking for evidence that is connected, that demonstrates the curriculum is well considered, well planned, well taught, and most importantly, has beneficial impact for the students that attend that provision. After conducting a number of deep dives, inspectors, as always, will bring all that information together and will make their final judgments for the quality of education across the provision and the judgments that they have to make in the other areas. Our next most significant proposal was that to separate the judgment from what is currently personal development, behaviour and attitudes, to separate the judgment that is currently personal development, behaviour and welfare into two separate judgments, one for personal development and one for behaviour and attitudes. And again, really important for you to familiarise yourself with the Further Education and Skills Handbook, because again, it specifies very clearly what inspectors will look at, what they will take into account, and how they will evaluate those two key judgments. Personal development will focus on provision rather than outcomes, and behaviour and attitudes is very much an outcomes-based judgment. Again, this received some really strong support across all sectors, and particularly in FE and skills. Since the introduction of the Common Inspection Framework, you as providers, and indeed our inspectors, have said that personal development, behaviour and welfare as one judgment is a very difficult judgment to make, because you are combining different things into a single judgment. So we fully accept that. That's why we propose to separate the judgments, and what we have done, given the strong support for the proposal, we have decided to introduce that. But as a result of the consultation responses, where a number of people expressed concern about how inspectors would evaluate personal development or how they would evaluate behaviour and attitudes, we have made changes to the handbook, and we have been more explicit to really be clear on what inspectors will do, what they will take into account, and how they will make those judgments. And I assure you that when inspectors come and have a look at your provision under this new framework, they will be looking for behaviour and attitudes that take into account the cohort of learners that you deal with, the type of provision that you offer, and behaviour and attitudes that are age appropriate. The handbook for FE and skills in this regard does differ somewhat to the behaviour and attitudes criteria listed in, for example, the schools handbook. So as I've said, we will introduce those two separate judgments. We have amended the framework and the handbooks to make clear inspectors will take account of the challenging circumstances that many of you operate within. And we absolutely will recognise the importance of good pastoral care and support arrangements for learners. We have amended the handbook to make very clear that if we find evidence of bullying and harassment, and if we're honest, bullying and harassment in one form or another does tend to happen, unfortunately, in most providers, we're interested in how it's managed and how it's dealt with. And the changes we've made are to avoid providers trying to eradicate bullying and harassment records from the sight of inspectors. We know it happens. We're interested in what you do to manage it and what you do to try and minimise it. So we don't want you to hide it. We're interested in what you do to deal with it. So on this slide, it confirms the new inspection judgments. There will continue to be that single overall effectiveness judgment. There will then be the 4 new key judgments, 1 for quality of education, 1 for personal development, 1 for behaviour and attitudes, and 1 for leadership and management. And we have, as far as possible, ensured that the criteria under each of those key judgments does not spill over into another key judgment area. So if you're given credit or if you're penalised for a particular criteria under one of the key judgments, that should not impact on one of the other key judgments. We therefore expect to see more spiky grade profiles under the new education inspection framework than we do under the current common inspection framework, where the grades for all key judgments tend to be, by and large, the same grade descriptor. So if overall effectiveness is good currently, all the key judgments tend to be good currently. I think you will see how under our new arrangements, grades for quality of education, personal development, behaviour and attitudes could differ and be higher or lower than the overall effectiveness grade. One thing that we are clear about is the quality of education judgment will carry the weight, and therefore the quality of education judgment will be a limiting grade for overall effectiveness. I'll move now to FE and skills specific. We made 3 proposals. The first was to change our provision type grades and reduce them from the 6 we currently grade down to the 3 that are shown on the slide. So we were proposing not to grade separately 14 to 16 full-time provision, traineeships and provision for learners with high needs. That's not to say we were going to stop inspecting that provision, but we were going to incorporate that provision under the appropriate provision type heading. Following the consultation, again, quite positive support for this, and where that support was most strong was reports need to be simpler, they need to be more individualised to the provider and more straightforward, and therefore 3 categories to report on rather than 6 would help with that process. However, there was some significant concern given the vulnerability of learners with high needs, and given some concern that in the current framework the grade and the report has really helped draw attention to this provision, particularly for parents, for local authorities and for funders, and has shone a light on this provision. Many providers, many organisations that operate in the special educational needs and disability arena raise some significant concern about losing that high needs judgment. So we have listened and we have decided to reduce the provision types from 6, but rather than 3 that we'd proposed, we have included a 4th, and we will now retain the provision type judgment for provision for learners with high needs. So that will continue to attract a grade under the new inspection framework. Our second proposal was in relation to short inspections. We wanted to continue with short inspections, but we proposed to introduce a consistent approach to the way inspectors conduct short inspections. Currently, the themes that inspectors evaluate on a short inspection are themes that the lead inspector decides based on their analysis of your previous inspection report and your current self-assessment report, if available. So those themes can look, and indeed do look, very different in each of the providers where short inspections are conducted. Short inspections, as you know, are only focused on ensuring the provider is good. They don't make judgments against the full framework. Our proposal was to make the themes that inspectors evaluate to make that judgment if a provider is still good or not, to be the same in all providers. And what we want to do is to realign those themes so we're ensuring that the provider is good against the criteria in the new framework rather than the criteria in the old framework. So we needed to ensure some consistent approach in the way that inspectors look at the curriculum. There was broad support again for this proposal, and many providers thought it would aid clarity to know what the themes that inspectors would look at on short inspections. There were 1 or 2 respondents who were concerned that the lead inspector should be able to have some discretion to look at a theme or 2 that's particularly important to the provider that they're inspecting. And there were some concerns that part of the proposal was to increase the time that inspectors spent on site for a short inspection, and some providers thought, in a nice way I think, that we spent long enough with them and they would sooner we don't spend any longer, or words to that effect. So in response, we are going to introduce those common areas, those mandatory themes, if you like, for a short inspection from September. And again, they are detailed in the handbook. We are going to allow a lead inspector some discretion to be able to look at a theme that is relevant to a specific provider if they need to do so. So there's some discretion there, but by and large, the themes that inspectors will look at will be standard in all providers. And we have decided not to introduce that on-site preparation routinely. That would increase the time inspectors stay on site. That was as a result of the consultation responses, and in honesty, as a result of the piloting that we've conducted, that actually has shown us it adds very little to most inspections for an inspector to do their preparation on site. It can be just as effective as is current practice on the telephone. It's only in the most complex and the largest providers where on-site prep may be helpful and may be useful. So that's why we've decided not to introduce that routinely. Finally, for FE and skills, we suggested that we would extend the time frame for providers judged grade 3 before they're re-inspected from 12 to 24 months to 12 to 30 months. We wanted to do that primarily because we know, particularly with the challenges that you face, not least in terms of funding, that it does take time to move from requires improvement to good. So what we have done is listened, we've looked at our evidence, and that's why we have suggested that should be the case. There was broad support from most in the FE and skills sector for that move. There were, however, more concerns than I had anticipated, and some respondents were very concerned that if we extend that time frame, it's possible that students would stay in provision that's less than good for the entire length of their programme. Providers were also concerned that if we didn't go back to inspect and providers that were judged grade 3 weren't making good progress, then that didn't seem fair that learners would stay in that provision for a longer period of time without inspectors looking at it. So again, we've listened, and in response, we have decided we will go ahead with extending the time frame, but we've really clarified in the handbook the purpose of the monitoring visit that we will now conduct to all grade 3 providers between 7 and 13 months after their inspection. And the purpose of that monitoring visit is to give an external inspector's view of the progress the provider is making towards becoming good, and importantly, it will act as a risk assessment for us to determine when that full re-inspection should take place, and whether that should be towards the end of that 30-month period or whether that should be quite soon after the monitoring visit, so at the 12-month period following inspection. And we're very clear in the handbook, if the monitoring visit identifies the provider is making sustained progress and they would benefit from that extra 6 months, we will give that extra 6 months. But if that monitoring visit identifies insufficient progress, or indeed the provider or provision in the provider getting worse, we will inspect sooner rather than later. So we hope that will satisfy the concerns that were raised by respondents. I'm coming to the end of the presentation. There were one or two recurring themes in responses that I just wanted to share with you. A number of respondents across all sectors, but particularly in FE and skills, commented that handbooks and proposals did not spell out all the different individual groups that we have, and the question therefore was, are Ofsted no longer interested in the performance of different groups of learners? Well, just to clarify, yes we are, but what we're interested in is all learners. So we've made clear in the handbooks and in the framework that where we refer to learners, it is to all learners, and all learners does mean those with special educational needs and disabilities, those in receipt of high needs funding, males, females, all the different groups that we currently look at are included when we say all learners. And the other recurring comment through responses was sort of a what about mental health question. And we all know in FE and skills particularly, you are dealing with students with mental health issues, and that can affect their education, their progression, their life chances. We are focused on evaluating the quality of education. We will absolutely look at and recognise the importance of support services that are in place that enable students to have a good quality of education. So we have made it explicit, and we have included reference to mental health and well-being within the personal development section of our handbooks to make clear that inspectors will look at and will consider what provision and what support is in place for mental health. So we hope, again, that will make that very clear. I'm going to conclude by just referencing, and I'll make sure these slides get to Paul and team so they will come to you with the hyperlinks that I'm about to show. All those documents were published on Tuesday. They will be on the hyperlinks that are included on that link there. Thank you very much for listening, and I'm happy to take any questions. Thank you very much indeed.
Paul, thank you very much indeed. That was a great take through the new framework. We're a bit pressed for time, so if you've got a question, and I'd like to take some questions from the floor, can you please make them concise? Paul's answers will be concise, and if they're difficult, we'll just put them into the workshop for later.
Julie, perfect.
Okay. Any questions? Lady just there. We can get a microphone to you. Introduce yourself, and if you could give us your concise question, that would be great.
Is that coming out? Yes. Yeah. Hi, I'm Bron Ray from Northern College of Adult Residential Education. Paul, you met with the Institutes for Adult Learning at the start of the year as part of the consultation where we asked you about the application of the framework for adult learners. The recent speech from Amanda Spielman was exclusively focused on children in schools. So I was just wondering what progress has been made to put measures in place to ensure that inspectors do understand and take account of the varied motivations and destinations of adult students other than employment and further education.
Okay. Paul.
Thank you. It's a really good question. And one of the difficulties I'm sure you will appreciate in an organisation that, in terms of volume, inspects an awful lot of schools compared to FE and skills providers. I can assure you, and I know you will expect me to say this, but Amanda is really, really supportive of the FE and skills sector, and in my view has done a lot for the FE and skills sector. Inevitably, sometimes during speeches, children and schools get mentioned an awful lot. So my job is to come to conferences like this and mention adult learners and further education and skills. To directly answer your question in terms of FE and skills inspectors and how we'll inspect adult learning specifically, we've done an awful lot of training already with inspectors, and when I've met with adult learning stakeholders, I've been very clear we're doing an awful lot more training with inspectors to make them aware of the different types of adult learning and how the new inspection framework will apply in terms of the curriculum. We know the curriculum is very different, will be or may be for a specific purpose. That's what we'll inspect you against, that curriculum, its purpose and how well it's fulfilling it. I will be interested in your feedback from September when we start doing some inspections.
Okay, thank you, Paul. Got time for one more question, if there is a question. Does this mean they're all saving them for Julie, do you think, in the workshops? Len, just right at the front, if we could just get a microphone to you.
Thank you. Hi, Paul. It might be quite difficult to reach a truly objective judgment on the validity of the curriculum. Isn't there a risk that the scrutiny simply shifts to the potentially less reliable data on progression and destination instead of focusing on attendance, achievement and value added?
Again, it's a really good question, and it comes back to the consistency point that I was making. Inspectors are never going to ignore performance data or data of any description. But what inspectors will do under this framework, they will have more freedom to contextualise that data. And what we are looking for in this framework is really to build on what we've already established in the current framework, and that's much greater professional dialogue with managers, with curriculum leaders, with teachers, as to why the curriculum looks like it does, the impact that it's having, and importantly, how it benefits learners. So it's to enable that professional discussion and enable inspectors to have that professional judgment. We will need your help to inspect, as we always have done.
Okay, thank you very much. I'm sure there'll be lots of questions in the workshop. If you're going to the workshop, they're being run twice, so there's plenty of space for people to go and see the Julie in the Ofsted session later on. If you could show your appreciation for Paul. Thank you, Paul.
Thank you very much.